But it is the 212th birthday of Edgar Allan Poe. What do you mean, had he survived? You think he's gone? Ha ha! Yes, our celebration hasn't been going all those 212 years, but he was born 212 years ago, and sadly, they say, died 40 years later. But what a canon of work and long-lasting recognition for someone who lived to be only 40 years old. Wow. We are in the morning of day 3 of a week-long celebration. Welcome, welcome. Over this week, we will have poems and stories and music and dancing and numerous of the virtual world's best storytellers on Saturday. And I say that without any self-congratulatory things, because I'm not reading on Saturday, but we have a half dozen storytellers who are. And we have dances tomorrow night and Saturday. And we're both in Second Life and Hypergrid Kitely's October World. So if you've never been outside of the beautiful walled garden of Second Life, come on over, check it out. We got 40 regions over here, guys. But either way, we're just glad you're with us. We have 4 separate audio streams running. You guys heard all this because I say it every morning, but we got 24/7, 4 audio streams running, giving lots of fun material in the Poe Listening Room and the interactive Ravens Chamber upstairs, and we're even live on YouTube on some obscure channel today. If you'd like to visit the Ravens Chamber afterwards, you could probably go up there now, except the streams would fight. Anyway, just walk through the arched doorway behind me here in Second Life, and you will magically be transported to the Ravens Chamber here in Kitely. Click on one of the ravens by the front door of the basilica. And a lot of this will still be around even after the week is out, especially here in Kitely. But the schedule's pretty full, so as I say, please visit the event portal, and you'll also get the current live YouTube link in case you want to share it with your non-virtual world friends who wonder what's up, what you get up to in Second Life anyway. And it would really help us, even if you don't want to watch it there, if you could pop over there and just hit the subscribe button to the YouTube channel. I mean, if you want to. We're more than halfway to our goal now. Yay. When we get up to a certain number, then I can actually start branding the channel and doing some more stuff with it. And of course, again, if you'd like to read along with the stories, I mean, quietly at home to yourself or the kiddies or something, or just download the stories. All the text for each one of our stories we present all week is available at our event portal, which is, you already know that, right there. Okay, and for those of you that aren't in the immediate presence, and some of you that are, thank you for everybody that has helped me with this, get this thing together all week. Thank you for coming. There's no point to me doing it if you don't come, not that it would stop me, but thank you for being here. That makes it a whole lot more pleasant to have somebody attentive and beautiful people to read stories to. Okay, then. What to do? We're off to Poe, right? Yeah, that's it. I remember Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is one of the most widely known American writers in history. He did a lot of things with his writing during his short 40-year life, but most remembered, of course, for stories of the mystery and macabre. He left an impression on generations of readers who've explored the dark side of mankind through his works. Edgar Allan Poe's life was almost as troubled as some of his writings. Death and failure surrounded the man, and he fought alcohol or drug abuse for most of his adult life. Which begs the question, could it be that the best art comes from the most troubled souls? Well, Edgar Allan Poe certainly supports that notion. Now I'm going to run a backup stream here in case that YouTube doesn't work out for me later. There. And so on to Poe. And unlike Virginia Clem, Poe's child bride wife, who looked upon Poe's poetry with notorious disfavor. Yes, poor Poe was put upon by Virginia because she just really didn't like his poetry. Of course, she was only 13 years old. What did she know? But I quite like his poetry, and I hope you do too. So to start us off this morning and possibly get our hearts pounding, here is The Bells. The bells is most often interpreted as an allegory for the seasons of life. From the beautiful silver bells of youth to the frightening iron church bells that toll old age and death. The eeriness of the subject matter of the poem becomes evident when the reader realizes that this poem was submitted for publication by Poe in 1848 and was published shortly after his death in 1849. The poem deals with themes like fear of death, the inevitable progression of the life cycle from youth to death. Always brings to my mind Carol of the Bells, like a Christmas carol sort of thing. But anyway, it's very sonorous. It's very rhymey and melodic. A lot of poetry you should read as though it's not poetry, but this one definitely is meant to be read rhymey, shall we say. Ooh, if you have a link to something or a suggestion we should go look at, Misk, I'd love to have it. Misk is quickly becoming a Poe authority in my realization of the world. So yeah, I'd love to. Anything you want to share along that way to get us pointed that way, that'd be great. Like I said, we're hoping to build out Raven's Chamber even more so with a lot more interpretive stuff and analysis and things like that. The bells. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night. While the stars they oversprinkle, all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight. Keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintabulation that musically swells from the bells, bells, bells. Bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Hear the melody. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells, what a world of happiness their harmony foretells. Through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight, from the molten golden notes and all in tune, what a liquid ditty floats to the turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a gush of euphony voluminously swells. How it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, bells, bells. Of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells. Hear the loud alarm bells, brazen bells, what a tale of terror now the turbulency tells. In the startled ear of night, how they scream out their affright, too much horror to speak, they can only shriek, shriek out of tune. And a clamor is appealing to the mercy of the fire, and a mad expostulation to the deaf and frantic fire, leaping higher, 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 with a desperate desire and a resolute endeavor now to sit or never, by the side of the pale-faced moon over the bells, 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 what a tale their terror tells, of despair, how they clang and clash and roar, what a roar, what a horror they outpour on the bosom of the palpitating air, yet the ear it fully knows by the twanging and the clanging, how the danger ebbs and flows, yet the ear distinctly tells, in the jangling and the wrangling, how the danger sinks and swells by the sinking or the swelling and the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 and the clamor and the clangor of the bells. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells, what a world of solemn thought their monody compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy meaning of their tone. For every sound that floats from the rush within their throats is a groan, and the people, the people, they that dwell up in the steeple all alone, and who tolling, tolling, tolling in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart of stone. They are neither man nor woman, they are neither brute nor human, they are ghouls, and their king it is who tolls, and he rolls, 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 rolls a pain from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the pain of the bells, and he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the pain of the bells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells, 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 to the sobbing of the bells, keeping time, 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 and he knells, knells, knells in a happy runic rhyme to the rolling of the bells, 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 to the tolling of the bells, 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 to the moaning and the groaning of the bells. So that's the bells. A little loud, huh? Let me turn it down a bit. Let's see here. Reaching across the room to the mixer. Maybe that's better. Don't know. Hello, Astro. Is that any better? Can we tell? Don't know. Okay, anyway. Started off with our requisite poem for the day. On to our story. Hey, well, that's good. Or maybe I was just too close. As Misk said. I'm kind of gravelly today. Maybe it'll work out well for Ligeia. Anyway, on to story time. Ligeia. Here the narrator is the haunted widower of an otherworldly woman named Ligeia, who seems almost vampiric in nature. Thinking back to their courtship, he finds that he cannot quite remember how or even where they met. He cannot even remember her last name, but he is consumed by the memory of her staggering intellect, her ravishing beauty, and crushing willpower, a testimony that the human mind and heart will turn a blind and glorify those we love. Now, eventually he does marry again, but not happily, or maybe, well, here's the story. Well, you can blame Kira for that. And the will therein lieth which dieth not, who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigor. For God is but a great will, pervading all things by nature of his intenseness. Man doth not yield to himself to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. Joseph Glanville. And again, it's a little old language, of course. If you want to read along, again, you can grab it there from the portal. Ligeia. I cannot for my soul remember how, when, or even precisely where I first became acquainted with the lady Ligeia. Long years have elapsed, and my memory is feeble through much suffering. Or perhaps I cannot now bring these points to mind, because in truth the character of my beloved, her rare learning, her singular placid cast of beauty, and the thrilling and enthralling eloquence of her low musical language made their way into my heart by paces so steadily and stealthily progressive that they have been unnoticed and unknown. Yet I believe that I met her first and most frequently in some large old decaying city near the Rhine. Of her family I have surely heard her speak. That it is of a remotely ancient date cannot be doubted. Ligeia, and studies of a nature more than all else adapted to deaden impressions of the outward world. It is by that sweet word alone, by Ligeia, that I bring before mine eyes in fancy the image of her who is no more. And now, while I write, a recollection flashes upon me that I have never known the paternal name of her who was my friend and my betrothed, and who became the partner of my studies, and finally the wife of my bosom. Was it a playful charge on the part of my Ligeia, or was it a test of my strength of affection that I should institute no inquiries upon this point? Or was it rather a caprice of my own, a wildly romantic offering on the shrine of the most passionate devotion? I but distinctly recall the fact itself. What wonder I have that I have utterly forgotten the circumstances which originated or attended it. And indeed, if ever she, the wan, misty-winged Ashtapheth of idolatrous Egypt, presided, as they tell, over marriages ill-omened, then most surely she presided over mine. Now there's one dear topic, however, on which my memory fails me not. It is the person of Ligeia. In stature she was tall, somewhat slender, and in her latter days even emaciated. I would in vain attempt to portray the majesty, the quiet ease of her demeanor, or the incomprehensible lightness and elasticity of her footfall. She came and departed as a shadow. I was never made aware of her entrance into my closed study, save by the dear music of her low, sweet voice, as she placed her marble hand upon my shoulder. In beauty of face, no maiden ever equaled her. It was the radiance of an opium dream, and an airy and spirit-lifting vision more wildly divine than the fantasies which hovered vision about the slumbering souls of the daughters of Delos. Yet Ligeia's features were not of that regular mold which we have been falsely taught to worship in the classical labors of the heathen. There is no exquisite beauty, says Bacon, Lord Verulam, speaking truly of all the forms and genera of beauty. There is no exquisite beauty without some strangeness in the proportion. Yet although I saw that the features of Ligeia were not of a classic regularity, although I perceived that her loveliness was indeed exquisite, and felt that there was much strangeness pervading it, yet I have tried in vain to detect the irregularity and to trace home my own perception of the strange. I examined the contour of the lofty and pale forehead. It was faultless. How cold indeed that word when applied to the majesty so divine. The skin rivaling the purest ivory, the commanding extent and repose, the gentle prominence of the regions above the temples, and then the raven black, the glossy, the luxuriant, naturally curling tresses, setting forth the full force of the Homeric epithet, hyacinthine. I looked at the delicate outlines of her nose, and nowhere but in the graceful medallions of the Hebrews had I beheld a similar perfection. There were the same luxurious smoothness of surface, the same scarcely perceptible tendency to the aquiline, the same harmoniously curved nostrils, speaking the free spirit. I regarded the sweet mouth. Here was indeed the triumph of all things heavenly, the magnificent turn of her short upper lip, the soft, voluptuous slumber of the under, the dimples which sported, the color which spoke, the teeth glancing back, with a brilliancy almost startling. Every ray of the holy light which fell upon them in her serene and placid, yet most exultingly radiant of all smiles. I scrutinized the formation of the chin, and here too I found the gentleness of breadth, the softness and majesty, the fullness and spirituality of the Greek, the contour which the god Apollo revealed but in a dream to Cleomenes, the son of Athenian. And then I peered into the large eyes of Ligeia. For eyes we have no models in the remotely antique. It might have been, too, that in these eyes of my beloved lay the secret to which Lord Verulam alludes. They were, I must believe, far larger than the ordinary eyes of our own race. They were even fuller than the fullest of the gazelle eyes of the tribe of the valley of Norjad. And yet it was only at intervals, in moments of intense excitement, that this peculiarity became more than slightly noticeable in Ligeia. And at such moments was her beauty. In my heated fancy this had appeared perhaps the beauty of beings either above or apart from the earth, the beauty of the fabulous Horae of the Turk. The hue of the orbs was the most brilliant of black, and far over them hung jetty lashes of great length. The brows, slightly irregular in outline, had the same tint. The strangeness, however, which I found in the eyes was of a nature distinct from the formation or the color of the brilliancy of the features, and must after all be referred to the expression. No word of meaning behind those vast latitude of mere sound we entrench in our ignorance of so much of the spiritual. The expression of the eyes of Ligeia, how for long hours I have pondered upon it, how have I through the whole of a midsummer night struggled to fathom it. What was it, that something more profound than the well of Democritus, which lay far within the pupils of my beloved? What was it? I was possessed with a passion to discover. Those eyes, those large, those shining, those divining orbs, they became to me twin stars of Leda, and I to them, the devoutest of astrologers. And having just read Berenice, and him going on here about her eyes, I get a little worried. Sorry, just an aside. There is no point, among the many incomprehensible anomalies of the science of mind, more thrillingly exciting than the fact, never, I believe, noticed in the schools, that in our endeavors to recall to memory something long forgotten, we often find ourselves upon the very verge of remembrance without being able in the end to remember. And thus how frequently in my intense scrutiny of Ligeia's eyes have I felt approaching the full knowledge of their expressions, felt it approaching, yet not quite be mine, so at length they entirely depart. And strange, oh strangest mystery of all, I found in the commonest objects of the universe a circle of analogies to that expression. I mean to say that subsequently to the period when Ligeia's beauty passed into my spirit, their dwelling as in a shrine, I derived from many existences in the material world a sentiment such as I felt always aroused within me by her large and luminous orbs. Yet not the more could I define that sentiment. or analyze, or even steadily view it. I recognized, let me repeat, sometimes in the survey of a rapidly growing vine, in the contemplation of a moth, a butterfly, a chrysalis, a stream of running water. I have felt it in the ocean, in the falling of a meteor. I have felt it in the glances of unusually aged people. And there are one or two stars in heaven, one especially a star of the sixth magnitude, double and changeable, to be found near the large star in Lyra, in a telescopic scrutiny of which I have been made aware of the feeling. I have been filled with it by certain sounds from stringed instruments, and not unfrequently by passages from books. Among innumerable other instances, I well remember something in the volume of Joseph Glanville, which, perhaps merely from its quaintness, who shall say, never failed to inspire me with the sentiment, "And the will therein lieth which dieth not, who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigour? For God is but a great will, pervading all things by nature of his intenseness. Man doth not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will." Length of years and subsequent reflection have enabled me to trace, indeed, some remote connection between this passage and the English moralist and the portion of the character of Ligeia. An intensity in thought, action, speech was possibly in her a result, or at least an index, of that gigantic volition which during our long intercourse failed to give other and more immediate evidence of its existence. Of all the women whom I have ever known, she, Ligeia, the outwardly calm, the ever-placid Ligeia, was the most violently a prey to the tumultuous vultures of stern passion. And of such passion I could form no estimate, save by the miraculous expansion of those eyes which had once so delighted and appalled me. Those eyes. And by the almost magical melody, modulation, distinctness, and placidity of her very voice. And by the fierce energy, rendered doubly effective by contrast with her manner of utterance, of the wild words which she habitually uttered. Now I have spoken of the learning of my Ligeia. It was immense, such as I have never known in woman. In the classical tongues was she deeply proficient, and as far as my own acquaintance extended in regard to the modern dialects of Europe, I have never known her at fault. Indeed, upon any theme of the most admired, because simply the most abstruse of the boasted erudition of the Academy, have I ever found Ligeia at fault. How singularly, how thrillingly this one point in the nature of my wife has forced itself at this late period only upon my attention. I said her knowledge was such that as I have never known in man or woman. But where breathes the man who has traversed and successfully all the wide areas of moral, physical, and mathematical sciences? I saw not then what I now clearly perceive, that the acquisitions of Ligeia were gigantic, astounding for her short years upon this earth. And yet I was sufficiently aware of her infinite supremacy to resign myself with a childlike confidence to her guidance through the chaotic world of metaphysical investigation at which I was most busily occupied during the earlier years of our marriage. With how vast a triumph, with how vivid a delight, with how much of all that is ethereal and hope did I feel as she bent over me in studies but little sought, but less known, that delicious vista by slow degrees expanding before me down those long, gorgeous, and all untrodden paths. I might at length pass onward to the goal of wisdom, to divinely precious, not to be forbidden. How poignant, then, must have been the grief with which, after some years, I beheld my well-grounded expectations take wing to themselves and fly away. Without Ligeia, I was but a child groping benighted. Her presence, her readings alone, rendered vividly luminous the many mysteries of the transcendentalism in which we were immersed. Wanting the radiant luster of her eyes, letters, lambent and gold, grew duller than Saturnian lead, and now those eyes shone less and less frequently upon the pages over which I pored. Ligeia grew ill. The wild eyes blazed with the too glorious effulgence. The pale fingers became of the transparent wax and hue of the grave, and the blue veins upon the lofty forehead swelled and sank impetuously with the tides of the gentle emotion. I saw that she must die, and I struggled desperately in spirit with the grim Azrael. And the struggles of my passionate wife were, to my astonishment, even more energetic than my own. There had been much in her stern nature to impress me with the belief that, to her, death would have come without its terrors. But not so. My words are impotent to convey any just idea of the fierceness of restraint with which she wrestled with the shadow. I groaned in anguish at the pitiable spectacle. I would have soothed, I would have reasoned, but in the intensity of her wild desire for life, solace and reason were the uttermost folly. Yet not until the last instance, amid the most convulsive writhings of Ligeia's fierce spirit, was shaken the external placidity of her demeanor. Her voice grew more gentle, grew more low, yet I would not wish to dwell upon the wild meaning of the quietly uttered words. My brain reeled as I hearkened entranced to a melody more than mortal, to assumptions and aspirations which mortality had never before known. That she loved me, I should not have doubted. I might have been easily aware that in a bosom such as Ligeia's, love would have reigned no ordinary passion. But in death only was I fully impressed with the strength of her affection. For long hours, detaining my hand, would she pour out before me the overflowing of a heart whose more than passionate devotion amounted to idolatry. How had I deserved to be so blessed by such confession? How had I deserved to be so cursed with the removal of my beloved in the hour of her making them? But upon this subject I cannot bear to dilate. Let me say only that in Ligeia's more than womanly abandonment to love, alas, all unmerited, all unworthily bestowed upon me, I at length recognized the principle of her longing with so wildly earnest a desire for life, which was now fleeing so rapidly away from her. It is this wild longing, it is this eager vehemence of desire for life, but for life, that I have no power to portray, no utterance capable of expressing it. At high noon of the night in which she departed, beckoning me peremptorily to her side, she bade me repeat the certain verses composed by herself not many days before. I obeyed her, and they were these. Lo, 'tis a gala night, within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng bewinged bedight, in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes, in the form of God on high, mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they who come and go at the bidding of vast and formless things, that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings. Invisible woe! That motley drama, oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth to the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that rise from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food, and the seraph sob at vermin fangs, its human gore imbued. Out of the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, and the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy, man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. "Oh, God!" half-shrieked Ligeia, leaping to her feet and extending her arms aloft with a spasmodic movement as I made an end of these lines. "Oh, God, oh, divine Father, shall these things be undeviatingly so? Shall this conqueror worm be not once conquered? Are we not part and parcel in thee? Who knoweth the mysteries of the will of its vigour? Man doth not yield to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will." And now, as if exhausted with emotion, she suffered her white arms to fall, returned solemnly to her bed of death, and as she writhed and breathed her last sighs, there came mingled with them a low murmur from her lips. I bent them to my ear and distinguished again the concluding words of the passage in Glanville. Man doth not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. She died, and I, crushed into the very dust with sorrow, could no longer endure. The lonely desolation of my dwelling in the dim and decaying city by the Rhine. I had no lack of what the world calls wealth. Ligeia had brought me far more, very far more than ordinary falls to the lot of mortals. After a few months, therefore, of weary and aimless wandering, I purchased and put in some repair in an abbey, which I shall not name, in one of the wildest and least frequented portions of fair England. The gloomy and dreary grandeur of the building, the almost savage aspect of the domain, and many melancholy and time-honored memories connected with both, had much in unison with the feelings of utter abandonment which had driven me into that remote and unsocial region of the country. Yet, although the external abbey, with its verdant decay hanging about it, suffered but little alteration, I gave way with a childlike perversity, and perchance with a faint hope of alleviating my sorrows, to a display of more than regal magnificence within. For such follies, even in childhood, I had imbibed a taste, and now they came back to me as if in the dotage of grief. Alas, I feel how much even of incipient madness might have been discovered in the gorgeous and fantastic draperies, and the solemn carvings of Egypt, and the wild cornices and furniture, and the bedlam patterns of the carpets of tufted gold. I had become a bounden slave in the trammels of opium, and my labors and my orders had taken a coloring from my dreams. But these absurdities must not pause to detail. Let me speak only of that one chamber, ever accursed, whither in a moment of mental alienation I led from the altar as my bride, as the successor of my unforgotten Ligeia. I led from the altar as my bride the fair-haired and blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine. There's no individual portion of the architecture and decoration of that bridal chamber which is now visible before me. Where were those souls of the haughty bride of the family when, through thirst of gold, they permitted to pass the threshold of an apartment so bedecked, a maiden and a daughter so beloved? I have said that I minutely remember the details of the chamber, and yet I am sadly forgetful on topics of deep moment. And here there was no system, no keeping in the fantastic display to take hold upon my memory. The room lay in a high turret of a castellated abbey, was pentagonal in shape and of capacious size. Occupying the whole southern face of the pentagon was the sole window, an immense sheet of unbroken glass from Venice, a single pane, and tinted of a leaden hue, so that the rays of either the sun or the moon passing through it fell with a ghastly luster on the objects within. Over the upper portion of this huge window extended the trellis work of an aged vine, which clambered up the massy walls of the turret. The ceiling of gloomy-looking oak was excessively lofty, vaulted, and elaborately fretted with the wildest and most grotesque specimens of semi-Gothic, semi-Druidical device. From out of the most central recess of this melancholy vaulting depended, by a single chain of gold with long links, a huge censer of the same metal, Saracenic in pattern, and with many perforations so contrived that there writhed in and out of them, as if endued with a serpent vitality, a continual succession of party-colored fires. Some few ottomans and golden candelabra of Eastern figure were in various stations about, and there was a couch, too, a bridal couch of an Indian model, and low and sculpted of ebony, with a pall-like canopy. See, I told you Misk has knowledge, a well-educated, well-bred from an early age knowledge. In each of the angles of the chamber stood on end a gigantic sarcophagus of black granite, from the tombs of the kings against Luxor, with their aged lids full of immemorial sculpture. But in the draping of the apartment lay, alas, the chief fantasy of all. These lofty walls, gigantic in height, even unproportionately so, were hung from summit to foot in vast folds with a heavy and massive-looking tapestry, tapestry of a material which was found alike as carpet on the floor, as a covering for the ottomans, and the ebony bed as a canopy for the bed, and as the gorgeous volutes of the curtains which partially shaded the window. This material was the richest cloth of gold. It was spotted all over irregular intervals with arabesque figures about a foot in diameter, and wrought upon the cloth in patterns the most jetty black. But these figures partook of the true character of the arabesque only when regarded from a simple point of view. By a contrivance now common and indeed traceable to a very remote period of antiquity, they were made changeable in aspect. To one entering the room they bore the appearance of simple monstrosities, but upon a farther advance this appearance gradually departed, and step by step, as the visitor moved his station into the chamber, he saw himself surrounded by an endless succession of the ghastly forms which belonged to the superstition of the Norman, or arise in the guilty slumbers of the monk. The phantasmagoric effect was vastly heightened by the artificial introduction of a strong continual current of wind behind the draperies, giving a hideous and uneasy animation to the whole. In halls such as these, in a bridal chamber such as this, I passed with the Lady of Tremaine the unhallowed hours of the first month of our new marriage, passed them with but little disquietude. That my wife dreaded the fierce moodiness of my temper, that she shunned me and loved me but little, I could not help but perceiving, but it gave me rather pleasure than otherwise. I loathed her with a hatred belonging more to demon than to man. My memory flew back, oh, with what intensity of regret. My memory flew back to Ligeia, the beloved, the august, the beautiful, the entombed. I reveled in recollections of her purity, of her wisdom, of her lofty, her ethereal nature, of her passionate, her idolatrous love of me. And now, then, did my spirit fully and freely burn with more than all the fires of her own. In the excitement of my opium dreams, for I was habitually fettered in the shackles of the drug, I would call aloud upon her name, Ligeia, during the silence of the night, or among the sheltered recesses of the glens by day, as if through the wild eagerness, the solemn passion, the consuming ardor of my longing for the departed, I could restore her to the pathway she had abandoned. Oh, could it be forever? The pathway she had abandoned upon this earth. About the commencement of the second month of the marriage, the Lady Rowena was attacked with a sudden illness from which her recovery was slow. The fever which consumed her rendered her nights uneasy, and in her perturbed state of half-slumber she spoke of sounds and of motions in and about the chamber of the turret, which I concluded had no origin save in the distemper of Rowena's fancy, or perhaps in the phantasmagoric influences of the chamber itself. Rowena became at length convalescent, and then finally well. Yet but after a brief period elapsed, ere a second more violent disorder again threw Rowena upon a bed of suffering, and from this attack her frame, at all times feeble, never altogether recovered. Rowena's illnesses were, after this epoch, of alarming character and of a more alarming recurrence, defying alike the knowledge and the great exertions of her physicians. With the increase of the chronic disease which had thus apparently taken too sure a hold upon Rowena's constitution to be eradicated by human means, I could not fail to observe a similar increase in the nervous irritation of her temperament, and in her excitability by the trivial causes of fear. She spoke again, and now more frequently and pertinaciously, of the sounds, of the slight sounds, and of the unusual motions among the tapestries to which she had formerly alluded, and brought to my mind a long-distant friend, Roderick, in his final days. One night, near the closing in of September, she pressed this distressing subject with more than usual emphasis upon my attention. She had just awakened from an unquiet slumber, and I had been watching with feelings of half anxiety, half of vague terror, the workings of Rowena's emaciated countenance. I sat by the side of her ebony bed upon one of the ottomans of India. She partly arose and spoke in an earnest low whisper of sounds which she then heard, but which I could not hear, of motions which she then saw, but which I could not perceive. The wind was rushing hurriedly behind the tapestries, and I wished to show her what, let me confess it, I could not all believe, that those almost inarticulate breathings and those very gentle variations, the figures upon the wall, were but the natural effects of that customary rushing of the wind. But a deadly pallor, overspreading her face, had proved to me that my exertions to reassure her would be fruitless. She appeared to be fainting, and no attendants were within call. I remembered where was deposited a decanter of light wine which had been ordered by her physicians, and I hastened across the chamber to procure it. But as I stepped beneath the light of the censer, two circumstances of a startling nature attracted my attention. I had felt that some palpable though invisible object had passed lightly by my person, and I saw that there lay upon the golden carpet, in the very middle of the rich luster thrown from the censer, a shadow. As a shadow, a faint, indefinite shadow of angelic aspect, such as might be fancied for the shadow of a shade. But I was wild with the excitement of an immoderate dose of opium, and heeded these things but little, nor spoke of them to Rowena. Having found the wine, I recrossed the chamber, and I poured out a goblet full, which I held to the lips of the fainting lady. She had now partially recovered, and took the vessel herself, and while I sank upon an ottoman near me, with my eyes fastened upon her person, it was then that I became distinctly aware of a gentle footfall upon the carpet and near the couch, and in a second thereafter, as Rowena was in the act of raising the wine to her lips, I saw, or may have dreamed that I saw, fall within the goblet, as if from some invisible spring in the atmosphere of the room, I saw, now I swear to you, I saw 3 or 4 large drops of brilliant and ruby-colored fluid fall into that goblet from the very air itself. Now if this I saw, not so Rowena. She swallowed the wine unhesitatingly, and I forbore to speak to her of a circumstance which must, after all, I considered have been but the suggestion of a vivid imagination on my part, rendered morbidly active by the terror of the lady, by the opium, by the hour. Yet I cannot conceal it from my own perception that immediately subsequent to the fall of those ruby-red drops from the mid-air into Rowena's goblet, a rapid change for the worse took place in the disorder of my wife, so that on the 3rd subsequent night the hands of her menials prepared her for the tomb, and on the 4th I sat alone, with her shrouded body in that fantastic chamber which had received her as my bride. Wild visions, opium-engendered, flitted shadow-like before me. I gazed with unquiet eye upon the sarcophagi at the angles of the room, upon the varying figures of the drapery, and upon the writhing and the party-colored fires in the censer overhead. My eyes then fell, as I called to mind the circumstances of a former night, to the spot beneath the glare of the censer where I had seen the faint traces of the shadow. It was there, however, no longer. In the breathing with greater freedom, I turned my glances to the pallid and rigid figure upon the bed. Then rushed upon me 1,000 memories of Ligeia, and then came back upon my heart with the turbulent violence of a flood, the whole of that unutterable woe with which I had regarded her thus enshrouded. The night waned, and still with a bosom full of bitter thoughts of the one and only supremely beloved, I remained gazing upon the body of Rowena. It might have been midnight, or perhaps earlier or later, for I had taken no note of time, when a sob, a low, gentle, but very distinct sob, startled me from my reverie. I felt that it came from the bed of ebony, the bed of death. I listened in an agony of superstitious terror, but there was no repetition of the sound. I strained my vision to detect any motion in the corpse, but there was not the slightest perceptible. Yet I could not have been deceived. I had heard the noise, however faint, and my soul was awakened within me. I resolutely and perseveringly kept my attention riveted upon the body. Many minutes elapsed before any circumstance occurred tending to throw light upon this mystery. At length it became evident that a slight, a very feeble, and barely noticeable tinge of color had flushed up within the cheeks and along the sunken small veins of the eyelids. Through a species of unutterable horror and awe, for which the language of mortality has no sufficiently energetic expression, I felt my heart cease to beat, my limbs grow rigid where I sat. And yet, A sense of duty finally operated to restore my self-possession. I could no longer doubt that we had been precipitate in our preparations. I no longer doubted that Rowena still lived, in fact. It was necessary that some immediate exertion be made, and yet Turret was altogether apart from the portion of the abbey tenanted by the servants. There were none within call. I had no means of summoning them to my aid without leaving the room for many minutes, and this I could not venture to do. I therefore struggled alone in my endeavours to call back the spirit ill hovering. In a short period it was certain, however, that a relapse had taken place. The colour disappeared from both the eyelid and cheek, leaving a wanness even more than that of marble. The lips became doubly shriveled and pinched up in the ghastly expression of death. A repulsive clamminess and coldness overspread rapidly the surface of the body, and all the usual rigours of illness immediately supervened. I fell back with a shudder upon the couch from which I had been so startlingly aroused, and again gave myself up to the passionate waking visions of Ligeia. Another hour thus lapsed. When could it be possible? I was a second time aware of some vague sound issuing from the region of the bed. I listened. In extremity of horror, the sound came again. It was a sigh. Rushing to the corpse, I saw a tremor upon the lips. In a minute afterward they relaxed, disclosing a bright line of pearly teeth. Amazement now struggled in my bosom with the profound awe which had hitherto reigned there alone. I felt that my vision grew dim, and that my reason wandered, and it was only by violent effort that I at length succeeded in nerving myself to the task which duty thus once more had pointed out. There was now a partial glow upon the forehead and upon the cheek and the throat. A perceptible warmth pervaded the whole frame. There was even a slight pulsation at the heart. The lady lived. And with redoubled ardor I betook myself to the task of restoration. I chafed, and I bathed the temples and the hands, and used every exertion which experience and no little medical reading could suggest. But all in vain. Suddenly the colour fled, the pulsation ceased, the lips resumed the expression of the dead once again, and in an instant afterward the whole body took upon itself the icy chillness, the livid hue, the intense rigidity, the sunken outline, and all the loathsome peculiarities of that which has been for many days a tenant of the tomb. And again I sunk, I say, into the visions of Ligeia. And again, what marvel I shudder while I write, again there reached my ears a low sob from the region of the ebony bed with the corpse. But why shall I minutely detail the unspeakable horrors of that night? Why shall I pause to relate how, time after time after time, until near the period of the grey dawn, this hideous drama of revivification was repeated, how each terrific relapse was only into sterner and apparently more irredeemable death, how each agony wore the aspect of a struggle with some invisible foe, and how each struggle was succeeded by I know not what of wild change in the personal appearance of the corpse. Therefore let me hurry to a conclusion. The greater part of the fearful night had worn away, and she who had been dead once again stirred, and now more vigorously than hitherto, although arousing from a dissolution more appalling in its utter helplessness than any. I had long ceased to struggle or to move, and remained sitting rigidly upon the ottoman, a helpless prey to a whirl of violent emotions, of which extreme awe was perhaps the least terrible, the least consuming. The corpse, I repeat, the corpse stirred, and now more vigorously than before. The hues of life flushed up with unwonted energy into the countenance, the limbs relaxed, and save that the eyelids were yet pressed heavily together, and that the bandages and draperies of the grave still imparted their charnel character to the figure, I might have dreamed that Rowena had indeed shaken off utterly the fetters of death. But if this idea was not, even then, altogether adopted, I could at least doubt no longer, when arising from bed, tottering with feeble steps, with closed eyes, with the manner of one bewildered in a dream, the thing that was enshrouded advanced boldly and palpably into the middle of the apartment. I trembled not, I stirred not, for a crowd of unutterable fancies connected with the air, the stature, the demeanour of the figure, rushing hurriedly through my brain, had paralyzed, had chilled me into stone. I stirred not, but I gazed upon this apparition. There was a mad disorder in my thoughts, a tumult unappeasable. Could it indeed be the living Rowena, who confronted me? Could indeed be Rowena at all, the fair-haired, blue-eyed lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine. Why should I doubt it? The bandage lay heavily about the mouth, but then might it not be the mouth of the breeding lady of Tremaine? And the cheeks, there were the roses in her noon of life. Yet these might indeed be the fair cheeks of the living lady of Tremaine, and the chin with its dimples as in health, might it not be hers? But had she then grown taller since her malady? What inexpressible madness seized me with that thought? One bound, and I had reached her feet. Shrinking from my touch, she let fall from her head, unloosened, the ghastly cerements which had confined it, and there streamed forth in the rushing atmosphere of the chamber huge masses of long and dishevelled hair. It was blacker than the raven wings of midnight, and now slowly opened the eyes of the figure which stood before me. "Here, then, at least," I shrieked aloud. Can I never be mistaken? These are the full and black and wild eyes of my lost love, of the lady Ligeia." "Oh, not bad. Gets himself a new wife. She dies, he gets the old one back. Madness? Supernatural? Well, it's Poe, so who knows? Let's see then. Let's wrap it up really quick with a short poem, and we'll take us to the top of the hour. The City in the Sea. Actually, I had another story. I was going to do the oval portrait, but I read that one too slow. So we'll wrap up with The City in the Sea. Lo, death has reared himself a throne in a strange city lying alone, far down within the dim west, where the good and the bad and the worst and the best have gone to their eternal rest. There shrines and palaces and towers, time-eaten towers that tremble not, resemble nothing that is ours. Around by lifting winds forgot, resignedly beneath the sky the melancholy waters lie. No rays from the holy heaven come down on the long night time of that town, but light from out the lurid sea streams up the turrets silently, gleams up the pinnacles far and fear, up domes, up spires, up kingly halls, up fanes, up Babylon-like walls, up shadowy long-forgotten bowers of sculptured ivy and stone flowers, up many and many a marvelous shrine whose wreathed friezes intertwine the vial, the violet, and the vine. Resignedly beneath the sky the melancholy waters lie, so blend the turrets and the shadows there that all seems pendulous in air, while from a proud tower in the town death looks gigantically down. There upon fanes and gaping graves yawn level with the luminous waves, but not the riches there that lie in each idol's diamond eye, not the gaily bejewelled head tempt the waters from their bed. For no ripples curl, alas, along that wildness of glass, no swellings tell that the winds may be upon some far-off happier sea. No heavings hint that the winds have been on seas less hideously serene, but lo, stirs in the air. The wave, there's movement there, as if the towers had thrown aside and silently sinking the dull tide, as if their tops had feebly given a void within the filmy heaven. The waves have now a redder glow, the hours breathing faint and low, and when amid no earthly moans down that town shall settle, hence hell, rising from the thousand thrones, shall do it reverence.